exactly. And, you mentioned Jadeveon Clowney. He's barely played this year because of injuries. When he gets going and he gets up to speed, the fact that you're going to have both of them on the field at the same time, it's going to be something special for Houston for a while.
I saw him flash once or twice yesterday, and that's exactly what I said to the guys I was watching the game with. I said, that's why you take him up near the top of the draft like you do, man, because that's going to be something right there, man. And I mentioned Cushing. Oh, man, I'm sure you saw the game. He obliterated Brian Hoyer on a couple of shots yesterday, man, and wow, the one I was really not sure that Brian Hoyer was going to be able to keep playing. He did, but man, they were all over. I said it at the beginning. I saw Pat McManaman from ESPN wrote it up. The line that wrapped up his article I thought was the best way to sum up that game. Never was there a better example of how a game's won and lost completely in the trenches in the NFL, because they were all over. I mentioned 3 times Brian Hoyer. I had somebody say that Brian Hoyer fell down. I said, no, what actually happened is his lineman was pushed back so fast off the snap that he tripped his foot of the quarterback in the regular drop back. It wasn't like there was any reason that should happen. And that's how much they were just dominant there. And so much of that, as we said, comes from JJ Watt. But on the other side, you mentioned Al Blue and their inability to stop him. When they needed it, he got it over and over and over again. Set a Texans franchise record for most carries at 36, and he had a $151. And pretty much the only thing he didn't do was end up in the end zone, because other than that, he was doing his thing.
Yeah, I think they got whipped up front. I think it started with the line, and
for sure.
Specifically Wynn and Bryant didn't do a good job, and
then Wynn went down.
It starts from there, and it's difficult. As I said, you kind of expect going into a game with Houston, okay, we got to stop the run, Arian Foster, everything he's been able to do. And then, it could be human nature in the fact that you breathe that sigh of relief and say, okay, there's no Foster. We don't have, who's Al Blue? I think that might have been some of it. But, when he's getting the ball 30 times, at some point you got to say, okay, we got to stop this. And I just didn't see that yesterday from the Browns defense. And that's what the NFL is. We talk about it. 1 week they look like world beaters in Cincinnati, and the next week you can't stop Alfred Blue. Who can predict this league?
Absolutely. I mean, and you saw that. Cincinnati goes from what they did to complete. Andy Dalton, a 2.0 passer rating against the Browns, 143 yesterday, So it flips around just like that. That defense, by the way, talking about Watt and Brian Cushing and what they did, Hoyer yesterday, 15 times he was under pressure or hit or sacked. Second highest in a game this season, which makes sense because this is probably his second worst game of the season right there with Jacksonville, and he was 3 of 13 when under that duress, under the passing, as we saw it. And I think that played itself out. We talked about it. I mentioned some of those hits that he took, and they were just, like you said, whipped in the trenches. And then, talking about that run defense, it gets hit even more. And I throw back to last week. We were talking, and I remember Kendall Lewis, one of the guys that we talked to looking at the game, said, man, I'm not saying they're doing it so far, but when guys keep going out, how many times can you do that? How many guys can you lose and replace? I know it's next man up here yesterday. You mentioned Billy Wynn. He gets injured. Jabal Sheard goes down. Then, of course, the big one, Carlos Dansby, who may be a much more serious injury. Who knows exactly what it is? He could have a sprained MCL and or even worse here, but those just completely thin out that front group even more. I don't even know if they had any spare defensive linemen left by the end of the game yesterday because that front was so taxed.
Yeah, and you really mentioned Dansby. To me, he's been the leader of that defense. Yes. He stepped in, and I questioned that signing in the offseason simply because of his age and the change from DeQuell Jackson. But it's, because he was such a leader, but it's worked out to this point. He's had a tremendous year, and the fact that it's so difficult to lose the leader on the defensive side of the ball. So, yeah, that's one you really, really have to keep an eye on. And it's a cliche, but that's what football is. It's a war of attrition, and the teams that handle injuries the best, trademark the Arizona Cardinals, go pretty far in this league. And you see in Arizona, they're 9-1, but there's no Darnell Dockett, there's no John Abraham, there's no Darrell Washington. Of course, that's suspension, not injury, but still he's not there. There's no Carson Palmer. They go out and win again for the third time in 4 games. So there is, everyone likes to talk about it, next man up. Not a lot of teams really embrace it and keep moving forward and playing. And we'll see the teams that do and handle it the best are generally the most successful.
For sure. And so now the Browns find themselves with many other teams here. We're entering the 6-game run. I know for some teams it's 5, but 6-game run for the Browns here and for most of the league down the stretch of the season where a whole group of teams is right there, 6-win teams. I mean, it's going to be very competitive. And, of course, the division, all of it separated by a game and a half, up and down. It's going to stay that way until the last week. So here comes the run. Everybody's going to make it, and then whichever teams survive are going to be the teams that make the playoffs. Can the Browns do it? I think it's going to be interesting. We've seen the game plan here. Obviously, we just mentioned the 2 worst games, in my opinion, not in my opinion, in reality. Hoyer's 2 worst games this season, yesterday in Jacksonville, no doubt. You compare out of the run that the Browns have had, in those 2 games, 39, less than 40. It's 39.4% was his passing numbers. It was 36 of 91 against Houston and Jacksonville. In the 3 wins with Cincinnati and the Tampa and Oakland there, 55 of 85 in those games, 65%. Browns, obviously, in the second half, completely got away from the run, which I got to say, that one got to me a bit with the play calling because even in the earlier part of the season, when they were struggling running the ball, they kept doing it. They kept running late in the game, keeping the play action going. Yesterday, I recall one series, and this was earlier in the game, where they just threw 3 deep passes, 1, 2, 3 in a row. Nobody was really open. They just threw down the field long 3 times in a row. I was a bit confused with that. They ended up throwing 50 times, ran the ball just 24. That is a flashback to 2013 all over again. That's last year all over again. So they got away from it, and they ended up throwing the ball far too much. Browns don't win that way because that's not what this Cleveland Browns team does. And plain and simple. So if teams take away the run, the Browns are going to have to find a way to deal with that. And, of course, this week, maybe that gets a little bit easier, maybe not, because you do have the return of Josh Gordon. Talk to me a bit. I know we mentioned last week. He doesn't come in with a cape. He's not coming in to save the day. But I think the threat of that, the threat of what he did last season when he came in after his suspension, does have some impact. It's not going to be game changer, but I think perhaps it opens things up a bit. What do you think?
Oh, it'll open things up. There's no question about that. I mean, it was only 2 games last year, but he did come in with a cape.
Yeah,
obviously,
no doubt.
He hit the ground running. 10 games is a little bit different, obviously. We're going to have to see how, what kind of shape he's in. If he's in, football shape, which I would, find it hard to believe. But, superior athletes like that, they tend to not need much time to ramp things up. Now, whether that takes a week or 2 weeks, I think it'll happen relatively soon. And the fact of the matter is, you just have to respect him. You have to. I mean, there are few people on the outside that can do the things he can do in this league. So just from the fact that he's on the field, it's going to open up things for everybody else, whether it's the running game, whether it's Hawkins, whether it's Gabriel, whether it's Miles Alston, everything. You just have to respect that ability. And we'll see how Cleveland's able to take advantage of it. I kind of agree with you. It's pretty evident that, Brian Hoyer shouldn't be throwing the ball 50 times. Now, we understand you're behind in the game, and some of it is that.
Right.
But that's just the bottom line. And the running game wasn't there. Kroll's numbers don't look that bad, but, I think one was a 30-something
That was
yard
it,
run.
Yeah, exactly.
So, the other 12 or 13 runs were basically for nothing.
Yep.
And nobody else could get anything going. So, but still, as you mentioned, you have to keep going. It wasn't the game.
No.
I think it was 14-7 at halftime, and even at the end of the third, it was 17-7. So, there's no reason to completely abandon it. So I kind of agree with you there. I thought that was a bad coaching miscalculation.
And they hadn't done that. Like, even when they were trailing late in games, they kept with the run, which is what other teams said made them have to keep respecting the play action and all of that, because the Browns just wouldn't stop trying to run the ball. So that really kind of that's what got me about it, is that this is one of the only times this season that they changed their MO there a bit. And I'm going to say this because we brought it up last week. There's clearly problems brewing with Ben Tate. We mentioned what was coming last week, but there's no way in the world that he is not unhappy with not just not getting the start, but not getting any opportunities against his former team. He had to have that game circled on his calendar. And I know it's all about whatever the team wants to do, but I'm just thinking of it as an individual. He had to have that game circled on his calendar and licking his chops. You want to play the team that you used to play for, and not only does he not start, but he gets 2 carries. He gets -9 yards. There were already problems that started coming out last week. This is just going to speed along that process. What do you think?
Yeah, you hate to see it. Anybody who's unhappy and it's one thing if you're 3-6 and you start rumbling about, your unhappiness with not getting enough touches and things like that. But the fact that they were coming in to that game 6-3, you want to keep it under wraps at a situation like that, because more than anything else, you come off bad because the team is having success and you look like a malcontent and you kind of take a hit to your own reputation. But I agree with you. I mean, obviously he would have liked to had a much bigger impact against his former team, and the fact that I'm sure in his mind that he thinks he could have gotten that running game going. It's got to be frustrating, but at the same time, as we always say, this is not, even after the loss, it's not typical for Cleveland to play meaningful football this late in the season. The fact that they're doing it, it's not the time to bring things like that up.
No, and that's part of it too, but he definitely did. And I just see it now coming. I'm like, okay, if this was already Fisher now, then, to me, I think it's just the beginning of it, and he got 2 carries, -9 yards yesterday. And again, I get it. They abandoned the run, and I understand that. But still, I can see that coming. You hate to see it because, as we said, there's, 10 teams now coming out of this weekend that are bunched up there in that category of 6-win teams that are all trying to get those playoff spots that are going to be chasing it. Browns are heading to Atlanta. And you know what? While we're talking about stuff, because I'm telling you, and I mean, I'm sure you see it, being on the national level, you kind of see a little bit of what's coming in. You talk to guys like us. You see each individual town, some of the things that are being talked about. Obviously, a lot of people here act that the season's over, the sky's fallen. I'm just curious, how many people in Denver woke up this morning and thought, man, our season just went off the trails. What happened yesterday, And, I mean, again, it speaks to, I brought this up earlier, what you and I have been talking about this year more than any. And maybe there's just something in the water more than usual this season. But, man, from one week to the next, whether it's Whether it's Andy Dalton going 2.0 against the Browns and going nearly perfect against the Saints, whether it's Sean Hill coming in here and leading the Rams, and here comes Trey Mason, and here's a team that they're coming off a switch back to the quarterback. You're thinking, okay, that's where their season stops being fun and starts getting a lot more difficult, and then boom, they jump on and take advantage of some injury